Hello, my name is Mitchell, and I'm just going to give you a quick walkthrough of my approach to a small development task. This is in Ruby, and I'm going to be using Minitest to do some TDD. So normally I use Rails. You'll see me kind of run into that gotcha a little bit later, trying to use some Rails methods. I also prefer RSpec for its convenience, but again, I'll just keep it simple with this and go with Minitest. It's obviously sped up 5 times. It's incredibly boring to watch someone write code, so I figured I'd just give a quick commentation on it, and mainly to give kind of an idea of how I approach stuff, and also, in a world of vibe coding, you kind of want to make sure that people can actually write the fundamentals as well. So normally I wouldn't be using no autocomplete, no agent chat, that kind of thing. I tend to use that quite heavily, but for this I've turned it off for now. So you can see me just setting things up. So I've added Minitest and a simple formatter class. The idea here is to format and validate a phone number for use with Twilio, and have a class that can do that for us. And there are 2 requirements detailed in the spec. One is for spaces within a phone number, and one is for valid format. So I'm just making sure that I've written the test for those, and that the functionality can have those pass to start with. So in my head I've kind of split this out already into validate and normalize, and format will come after that. So there's the format line there. And so now I have that basic functionality in. I'll start to refactor it a little bit, make it read a little bit better so I can follow it. But also I do realise as part of this that there is some requirement for individual error classes to be used. They are just inherited from the standard error. I'm guessing they would have more functionality added to them later. And then I'll start writing some more tests, right? So I'll start with the basics, which is nil, making sure it passes for that. I do actually change my mind here and decide actually I'm just going to cover all blank. This is where I kind of run into the pretty funny and common issue that we have with Rails, which is we are given way too many convenience methods that we get used to, and you kind of expect those to always be there, but in this case blank is not in Ruby core. Another thing to note is you'll probably see it's fairly inelegant the way I'm writing this in a minute. Refactoring usually comes after I've got a sort of thin slice of the functionality ready. I'll start to make it more readable and maintainable. But for now I just like to keep things simple. So for example, adding the errors module into the same class just makes sense from a simplicity point of view. You'll also see me doing a lot of counting of characters. It's probably one of the hardest things is keeping track of how long these strings are and making sure they're covered. So in this case, it does mention that UK mobile phone numbers are 11 digits long. I decided to cover both landlines and mobile in this because although formatting is only going to be used for Twilio to send SMS, you obviously don't know what a user is going to input. So it's important to get those formatting lengths right. And then once we've got blank validated, we can also then move on to invalid characters as well. So the invalid character, the first test I'm using here is actually, I tend to go with what a user may try to input. So in this case I'm swapping a 0 for an O. And I'm not always that confident with my regex, so double checking it. For example, I got it wrong there. I thought space was plus S, and it's actually just /s, \S. I tend to use regex calculators and validators quite a lot. It's the kind of thing that I use so frequently it's hard to memorize. You'll see me getting a little bit stuck on the line lengths there as well. So what I want to do in this case is make sure that it passes the line length validation and then fails the invalid characters validation only. And then I kind of realize as well here with stripping out alphanumeric, I don't want to normalize that. The spec does say that I need to validate it or invalidate it if there are weird characters involved. I think that makes sense as well. We want to be able to pass that message back to the user to make sure they double check their phone number. So I'm just moving that up to the validate method there. I do realise I'm looking back at there is actually a match question mark method in Ruby core that I could have used here. But this will work for now. So it's important to know that validation happens after the normalization as well. So we are validating a normalized phone number, which means stripping the trunk and the international prefix off it first. I figured that was the simplest way to approach this, is to not have to deal with the different types of prefixes, just get them out of there and then reformat it later. I don't think that would scale well for a library that might do multiple countries, but for this particular specification, I think it works fine. And then just making sure we've got length either side of the limit in the tests. And then moving on to the prefixes. So these can obviously, we don't want to validate against these because they can be entered validly in many different forms. So instead I decided to just match the different types of prefixes that are allowed and normalize those and basically strip those out. Again, I don't think the regex here is that elegant, to be honest. I know there's some improvements to be made there, especially with there's potentially some gotchas with the ordering that I'm using there. So that's something that I would probably improve later. And again, because we've normalized spaces here, we're just looking for 0, 44, plus 44, or plus 440. And make sure we've got tests to catch all those. Double checking all the tests and methods of that, and then start to refactor, make things a bit nicer now. So adding developer friendly error messages, at least. Not really sure on the use case here. That's something that I usually gather when given requirements, is who's going to use it. So in this case I'm just going with maybe a mix of users and developers potentially. And then think about users again and what is valid as a phone number. There are obviously hyphens and decimals inside phone numbers we don't want to validate against because they are valid, but we do want to normalize them out. One I did miss on a rewatch here is brackets as well. And then realizing as well that extensions are not necessarily handled as part of this formatter, so that's something that it could be improved with. And then pulling out all the strings and numbers into constants, as well as the regex. This is something that's probably going to be improved later and maybe potentially even tested. So making sure they're just pulled out into the top of the class where they're more obvious. And then adding my own little simple Rails style blank there, and pulling out all the conditionals for all the validations. Again, just makes it more readable and easily testable. And then obviously making sure once we've refactored that we are running the test again. spotted another space character there that I might want to add, so that was a tab that I added. And also hard nil as well. Right, and this is where I normally work. So this is cursor, and I'm just using cursor to make sure I've not missed anything super obvious. So rather than using it to develop, I've just used it to kind of double check my work in this case. I think that's fair enough to do. I would recommend it at the very least, if not using it as part of your workflow. So it pulls a bit too much here. It tries to start doing some caching and whatnot. But it does recommend some good changes. So handling integers. So I convert everything to string and normalize it before moving on to the validations. It also tries to suggest making the errors module a bit more abstract, which I think is a good shout, but for this particular use case, I just want to keep things simple for now. I'm not really heavily using the errors at all. It has caused some formatting issues, annoyingly. So I'm just fixing those now. And yeah, I think converting all the input to string kind of makes sense. It's a bit overkill maybe, but it covers us for a range of issues. And then adding some tests just to make sure those new lines are covered. Probably should throw an error for that integer, but to be honest, I prefer to normalize as much as possible before throwing the errors anyway. And just playing that commit up. And that is it. Thanks for watching. Sorry it was painful, but yeah, hopefully it gives you an idea of my approach.